morning, students. So this is the second presentation for ELD1501, Early Learning and Development Areas, which is your Learning Unit 1. I am your lecturer, Mrs. A. Carrim, and you can email me on ecareer1@unisa.ac.za. So the purpose of this presentation is basically to go through the outcomes of the Learning Unit 1 and give you a brief introduction to help you become familiar with the content of Learning Unit 1. So Learning Unit 1 is an introduction to the theoretical knowledge informing elders. So when you have completed this learning unit, you should be able to engage with the implications of adopting a particular theoretical stance in particular contexts, and also a survey of relevant theories in development, learning, curriculum to understand the construction of early learning development areas. So let's look at early education, an introduction basically. So what is childhood development? In South Africa, early childhood development is defined as an umbrella term that applies to the policies by which children from birth to at least 9 years old grow and thrive physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, morally, and this is part of the Department of Education that you would find this definition. What does the South African ECD policy undertake? Remember, the South African ECD policy undertakes to provide all children with access to quality ECD services. And why is early years so important? Remember, there is a critical time for the critical development window of our children, laying the foundation for success at school and beyond. So it's very important that scaling up access to quality early childhood development can unlock pathways, out of poverty, build employment and productivity, and level up the outcomes for children today. So what will ensuring access to quality pre-primary education do for learning and education outcomes? So this is something that you need to consider in terms of, allowing all children to have access to quality pre-primary, whether they come from rural, urban, semi-urban, all the different contexts that early childhood education can be in. So ensuring access to quality pre-primary education is a key strategy for improving learning and education outcomes, as well as the efficiency of education systems. Let's look at the importance of early learning. In terms of, I think we missed one slide. Let me just check. Okay, no, it's fine. The importance of early learning. In terms of the Sustainable Development Goal 4 for 2030, this is something which seeks to ensure that all girls and boys have access to quality early childhood development, in terms of care, pre-primary education, so that they are ready for primary education. When you come to the National Development Plan, the NDP Vision for 2030, in South Africa, it proposes making early childhood development a top priority among the measures, to improve the quality of education and long-term prospects of future generations. Dedicated resources should actually be channeled towards ensuring that children are well cared for from an early age, and to receive appropriate emotional, cognitive, and physical development stimulation. So what is early childhood development policy? What does it entail? It states that by 2030, a full comprehensive age and developmentally stage quality early learning development program should be available and should be accessible to all infants and children and their caregivers. And when it comes to the National Curriculum Framework for Children Birth to 4 Years, the NCF, 2015, it drove the first nationally applicable curriculum framework to be used across a variety of early childhood education and development provisioning, different settings with the different ECD workforce, including caregivers and practitioners. So when it comes to the NCF, it's basically a response to the challenges that early childhood development sector has faced in not having, a common curriculum framework for the 0 to 4 age cohort. So this framework is not meant to be used in a prescriptive way. Remember that. It is to be understood and to be a flexible tool to create opportunities for quality experiences for babies, toddlers, and young children in a holistic manner. So when we're looking at the National Early Learning Standards in 2009, this is the first step towards the development of NCF. It was basically the development of this. And one of the aims of NCF is to promote young children's experiences of socially and culturally sensitive environments where attention is paid to inclusive, equitable, and democratic practices. So this is very important for you to understand. When it comes to the ECE programs, you'll see there are many types of ECE programs available to a child or to a caregiver to promote ECE in different contexts and settings in South Africa. So, including rural, in terms of informal, urban, low income, middle class, high income contexts. So, the ECE services can be as either center-based programs or non-center-based programs. So when it comes to center-based programs, they are varied, and some are formal and some are informal, and maybe found in different spaces. They may have started by NGOs, individuals, ECD associations, in response to a need for ECE services in the community. The age cohort normally includes 0 to 4 years, and ECD centers are still the most common way of offering early learning services. When it comes to non-center based programs, they may include, family home visiting, parenting programs, child minding, playrooms, mobile ECE programs, a toy library. So these are all programs that you can read about more in your study guide chapter of Learning Unit 1. So due to the vast differences in the context in South Africa, you need to consider, understanding the different contexts. So, what is a rural environment? It's often characterized by a lack of access to clinics, to schools, to adequate nutrition, leading to stunted growth. So these are things that you need to consider. At a national level, more than 20% of children under the age of 5 suffer from stunting or other health issues resulting from malnutrition. So what is important for teachers to understand about their learners? As a teacher, it is important to understand the background, including, cultural norms, traditions, the indigenous practices of your children, so that your planning and pedagogical practices and reflections could play an enabling role in the promotion of the holistic development of our young children. So including children with special needs, remember, they cannot be excluded. The majority of children in South Africa come from impoverished homes and face difficult contextual circumstances. So some of them are living in single families or with their grandmothers, and have absent fathers in their family. Some of them experience child-headed households and experience a lack of food and other basic amenities. So you need to understand the context of of the children you are teaching. What is the reality of ECE services in SA? Remember, in reality, many children are accessing ECE services, but 3.5 million children in South Africa are not accessing any form of ECD programs. And of those who have access some of the ECD programs, 2.1 million children are in unregistered programs, and only 800,654 children are in registered centers. So this is something to worry about. So let's look at an overview of the theories, frameworks, approaches, and policies that you need to consider when going through this module. The International Convention on the Rights of a Child, the Child Development Theories, which is Piggott, Vygotsky, Pereira, and play-based pedagogy, and then you have the South African legislations and policy. All of this influences the development of ECE standards in South Africa. So this is something that you need to consider. There are various theoretical and other influences that guided the development of NCF. Remember the South African Constitution, the ECE policies, the socio-cultural theory, the developmental psychology, the cognitive development theory, critical theory, human rights frameworks, among others. So these are all things you need to consider. Remember, the sociology of childhood has influenced the development of the South African national curriculum as well. And Professor Ibrahim reminds us that a reconceptualization of a child and childhood should be situated and therefore ground who South African children are and what they should know and be able to do. So the children's right framework underpinned by human rights is a theory widely embraced in South Africa. So policies have also influenced the development of the elders. For example, the National Integrated Policy for ECD 2016. You need to look into these policies, theories, frameworks, approaches, to be able to apply your content well in this module. So there's a lot of information that you need to go through in terms of, the International Convention on the Rights of a Child, where you'll notice that the convention recognizes international treaty widely, by most countries in achieving joint efforts to enforce all the rights that are fundamental to the full development of children. It also interprets the rights to education as starting at birth. It argues the best interests of the child. The right to education includes not only the creation of conditions for access to different forms of care, but also the establishment of those conditions. So it's very important that you go over this. And remember, South Africa is a signatory to the Convention on the Rights of Children, and is obliged to submit a report yearly to the United Nations showing evidence, on what is being done to uphold children's rights. South Africa is also a signatory to the African Charter on Rights and Welfare of Children. When you look at the child development theories, child development theories focus on explaining how children change and grow over the course of childhood. And such theories are very important to understand, to understand the development, which includes physical, social, emotional, and cognitive growth of our young children. When you look at Pigot's, the theorist, basically, it's called the cognitive development theory. His theory focuses on the individual child and is linked to different ages in respect to cognitive development. And he distinguished, the stages: the sensory motor phase, birth to about 2 years of age; the pre-operational phase, 2 to 7 years, with a sub-stage named the pre-conceptual stage, 2 to 4 years, and the concrete operational stage, 7 to 11 years. It's very important that you go through this. When we look at Vygotsky, the socio-cultural theory was developed by Vygotsky, where he mentions the social interaction and culture plays an important role in children's construction of knowledge. And unlike Pigot's theory, Vygotsky's theory does not correspond with age, but focuses on social interaction. For example, the interaction between peers, between the child and the older children, and between child and adults in general. So, teacher, parent. So the focus is more on language because of the importance of language in learning, and how children make sense of their world through shared experiences. This is where the learning occurs in the zone of proximal development. This encompasses the difference between what a child knows and what a child can learn with the assistance of a more knowledgeable person in terms of another child or an adult. And when we look at Paulo Pereira, he's basically known to work on critical consciousness and critical pedagogy, which articulates against the banking method as a form of teaching, where the child is seen as an empty vessel, waiting to be filled up. So his teaching principles are important in terms, from a point of view from the teacher's role in facilitating children's development. His contention is that teachers do not transmit or impart specific knowledge, but rather provides environments, and experiences from which a child learns by building upon their prior knowledge. So as a critical social theorist, the key to teaching practices in his theory is and reflective practice within any democracy. One significant and effective way to achieve a more equitable learning environment is through the use of critical literacy, a pedagogical approach which promotes the questioning of taken for granted beliefs and assumptions, and allows for all worldviews and ways of knowing to be recognized and valued. So literature has long been recognized as a key way to broaden children's thinking. So we need to look at, take this a step further and find out how to encourage children to engage with a multiple worldview on a range of cultural and societal issues. So this is also very important that you understand. When it comes to the South African legislations and we missed the play-based pedagogy. Everyone knows play when they see it, on the streets, in villages, on playgrounds, in classrooms. So people from every culture, whether it's have economic backgrounds, are different, community engagement, in some form, play is from the earliest of ages. So yet at the same time, play can be hard to define, there is a growing international recognition of the importance of play for promoting effective development and learning in ECE. So this is a result of ongoing research on the brain development and the realization that the demands on the 21st century require flexible and creative thinkers. So the right to play is recognized, in the Convention of the Rights of a Child. And the South African Department of Basic Education strongly promotes the adoption of play-based approach for children from birth through foundation phase. So the NCF strongly advocates for play pedagogy as well in the ECE. So this is something that you need to understand, that play-based pedagogy involves both child-initiated and teacher-supported learning, where the teacher encourages children's learning and inquiry through interactions that aim to stretch their thinking to higher levels. So this is also very important that you understand. And now we're looking at the South African legislations and policies. There are key legislations and policies that influence the development of the NCF and its elders. So NCF draws on the principle of social transformation, and values that underlie our constitution in terms of equality, equity, inclusivity, diversity, democratic practices. So the Constitution, the Education White Paper on Early Childhood Development, the National Integrated Policy for ECD are some of the policies that promotes the belief that the child is an important, in his or her own education and development, and have influenced the development of the elders. Okay, so just remember, all of this influences the development of the ECE standards in South Africa. So let's look at the role of curriculum. So what is a curriculum benchmark? Remember, this is a powerful tool for developing the visions and the content as underpinning policies for early childhood education. When it comes to what does the curriculum mean in early years in the different contexts, you need to understand that there's a part in the study guide that explains that the curriculum describes national level, and sub-national level frameworks for ECD provision, which define the desired outcomes and learning standards and the key content that is required. And it also describes particular philosophies that are used in ECE. It also describes how it acts as a tool that guides the content and the approach to children's care and learning. And it's also conceived as a conceptual framework that reflects the purpose of teaching, learning, and learning content, whether it be directly or indirectly, and the teaching method formalizes the learning content and articulates definitions of education policies, with the pedagogical processes developed in educational institutions, and as well as the content that integrates literature from prominent researchers and philosophers. So from the above description, you'll note that curriculum can be conceived as a framework that reflects the social and political consensus regarding the why, what, and how of education and learning. So the development of the NCF is also important for you to understand, in terms of, it's basically critical when we acknowledge that the curriculum and standards can reinforce positive impact on the children's learning and development, which includes ensuring even quality across different settings, thereby promoting equity, providing guidance to staff on how to enhance children's learning and well-being, and also informing parents, of their children's learning and development. So another thing that you need to consider is integrating African theories of child development. To a large extent, we must accept that Westernized knowledge and models were used in South Africa prior to 1994 in the ECE curriculum. So there was minimal or no effort to integrate African theories of child development, which meant that children started ECE from a negative position, when it comes to language, culture, the way of life was not appreciated or taken note of. Africa's children are not socialized only in school. They also receive family-based education, as they develop as accredited participants in their cultural communities. So there's a strong advocacy, for not displacing indigenous knowledge and practices by imposing a singular framework for optimal early childhood development. So it's something that you need to consider. Remember, the integration of indigenous practices also means that the values of family and the role of peers are taken into consideration. So it's something that you need to read about and understand. And then we need to also look at the next slide, which is just basically giving you an overview of the South African National Curriculum Framework. So There's quite a bit of information that you need to read through in the study guide, in terms of the national curriculum framework. But I just basically added the overview so that you have a basic understanding. The vision for the national curriculum framework was based on three themes, which is I am a competent person, my learning and development is important, I need strong connections with adults. And then we're looking at the 12 principles based on in the vision and the themes, which is six learning and development elders, which reflect the vision, themes, and principles, in terms of well-being, identity and belonging, communication, exploring maths, creativity, knowledge and understanding of the world. And each elder is structured in four sections, which means the aims for development and learning, the development guidelines based in the developmental domains, examples of activities, for babies, toddlers, young children, and also guidelines for assessment to observation and of development and learning needs and interests. So the four broad phases for planning activities with babies, toddlers, and children would be beginning, moving on, advancing further, and towards grade R. So it's important that you go through the purpose of the NCF, in terms of affirming that young children are competent people who are actively involved in their learning, to basically become productive citizens and actively honor the diversity of our young children, their capabilities, they taking into context their language, their heritage, their backgrounds, and promote young children's experiences of socially and culturally sensitive environments, and recognize the importance of local context and indigenous resources. We also need to deepen our understanding of the essential learning areas that relate to the building a program relevant to ways in which young children develop and learn, and value the curriculum, as a process where critical reflection informs teaching, learning, and the creation of effective practice in diverse contexts. So all of this, it also develops an asset-based approach when supporting adults who care for and educate our young children, appreciate the wealth of the embedded experience they have, and help with reflection on the relevance and effectiveness of an ECD program, which develops a shared vision and professional language for the ECD field through common values, principles, and aims that guide integrated care and education in different settings. Okay, so let's look at the early learning development areas, elders, which we did note within the overview. So NCF basically provides a guidance on the play, to plan learning opportunities that are developmentally appropriate for individual children by interacting and providing opportunities that boost the confidence of our young children. And it's an integral part of building confidence, which allow children opportunities to explore and take control of their own learning by providing free play or child-initiated activities, which are important. Remember, the elders are supported by the three themes, which speaks of a competent child with knowledge and skills, which in turn are guided by 12 principles, like we mentioned, and assessment guidelines are provided that is expected that a teacher will use this to guide the holistic development of children rather than focusing on school readiness. So the elders are basically domains of development and must be included in ECE daily program activities. So the six elders organize the content of activities for the age cohorts, babies, toddlers, young children, which can be used by teachers, caregivers, parents, and other stakeholders. So the elders are meant to guide the teachers in planning, and each elder has a broad aim and development guidelines, and suggested activities for the different age cohorts. So there are also assessments which you need to watch out to alert us as teachers to keep in mind and use this for discussions with parents. And it's also allowing us to integrate meaning with that more than one elder can be evident in an activity. For example, playing in the water play area can integrate many elders in terms of exploring volume, communicating with peers. So elders are meant to be flexible and context sensitive. Also, the child is seen as an active participant in their learning, the choices they make, the action they make in their learning. So for this type of meaningful pedagogy, it becomes critical that our teachers access the relevant knowledge, skills, reflective practice, and continuous support to carry out ongoing reflection and adopt a culturally responsive equity pedagogy to facilitate at this level. So remember well-being, communication, exploring mathematics, creativity, identity and belonging, knowledge, and understanding of the world. This is something I feel is very important, that I note the value of reflections in the teaching practice. So some questions that you need to use to guide your reflection in ECE programs by adding your thoughts and, asking questions. This may be a useful tool for you to, especially when you start, your teaching practice. Consider all of these questions. Are all my learners actively involved and participating? Asking questions. Do they show interest? Are they talking to their peers? Are the needs of all my learners accommodated as individuals, in terms of diversity, language, social background, special needs? Are all my learners progressing, satisfactorily? And are all my learners' parents involved, in terms of meetings, workshops, message books, individual meetings? Are all my learners receiving the appropriate support, and also, are all my learners benefiting from the support they receive? Are there some learners who still require additional support? Are all my learners interested in my resources, whether it be a display table? Do they feel the resources ask questions? Should I adapt my class setting? Are all my learners reaching their outcomes during my assessment? Observation book. Are all my learners benefiting from my teaching methods? Are all my learners who experience barriers to learning receiving appropriate additional support? So these are all questions that you need to ask yourself, um, and ensure that that you constantly reflecting in your ECE programs and adding your thoughts and asking questions. It's very important. Okay, so this brings us to the end of this presentation. Thanks for listening, and remember, asking these questions regularly and eventually become part of your teacher's natural teaching style, and it builds skills to become thinking teachers who are able to adapt their teaching to meet the needs of their diverse learners in an inclusive way. So teachers use different methods of observation of children and recording before making an assessment. So I think it's very important that you go through this learning unit as as thoroughly as possible, so that you ensure that you complete the activities and are able to complete the assessment that forms part of this learning unit. So I hope the discussion helps you to review the elders within a critical lens as you study this module as well, and also, give you a good background onto what is expected, and also to understand the NCF calls for critical thinking and inquiry, and let me remind you about being a reflective teacher, and the model of the thinking teacher that I just mentioned, who responds culturally, equity sensitive to equity sensitive pedagogical to an equity sensitive pedagogical framework. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation, and I hope this helps, and all the best for your assessment.